We are launching this Hamilton County Partnership for On-Farm Composting in partnership with the Hamilton County Conservation District. So this information session, we're going to kind of go over what the program is about, why we're doing it. And then we have a consultant, James McSweeney, who's going to show you some examples of composting on farms that he has worked on. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the actual form itself and how to express interest. And if you've not already done that, and then we're going to open up for questions. So most of this session is going to be open for questions, and you can type questions in the chat, or you can just raise your hand and we'll call on you. Try to stay muted during the presentation. We can try to mute you if you accidentally come off mute, but we will have a lot of time at the end for questions. So the Hamilton County Resource, we are the solid waste district for Hamilton County. Our mission is to reduce how much waste goes to the landfill. So our interest in this is trying to improve food scrap processing capacity, encourage more composting in Hamilton County. So that's kind of the angle that we are coming from when we do this. And I'm going to start sharing while Nicole, you introduce yourself.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Gunderman. I'm the agriculture specialist at the Hamilton County Conservation District. And there is a conservation district for every county in the state of Ohio, oftentimes considered or called the Soil and Water Conservation District. So our focus and emphasis is on protecting our soil and water resources. But we shortened the name, and it is, we're also pretty comprehensive with conservation in general as well. So as the agriculture person, I'm really excited about this partnership with Resource and being able to hopefully find some win-wins with both the waste reduction and helping to support farmers and farms and horse barns and folks who have excess organic waste and could instead develop a healthy soil amendment. So conservation wins and wins on both sides. It's a partnership all around. So excited about this, and always here if you have questions supporting the ag community. So thanks.
Thanks, Nicole. Are you all seeing the big screen? Right. Okay. Thanks. We'll move on to the goals of the program. Basically, we want to create more composting capacity, more food scrap composting capacity. Our goal for the program is 2,500 more tons of food scraps diverted each year. We don't know if that's going to be doable or not. We're trying. So we set a goal. But more than just diverting the food scraps, we really want to create a valuable soil amendment that will add nutrients back to Hamilton County soils. It's very important that we're creating a product that is very valuable. It's also important to us that we follow best management practices, that these sites are going to be assets to the community and not a burden. We want to follow, the best technologies that are available, the best practices. We don't want to have sites that are too big for what they can handle. So that, they're creating odors or anything. So we really do want them to be community assets. And we want to support local farms and local businesses and creating a viable compost product. Some farms are going to want to use this compost on their farm. Some may want to sell it as a compost product. We want to be able to make both happen. So there's 4 main things that this program is going to provide. One is consultant help. So I mentioned earlier, we've hired James McSweeney as a short-term consultant for the launch of this program. We are going to also maybe hire more consultants or, a different consultant for the long term of the program. But we are wanting, even at this beginning stage, even as you're filling out the form or thinking about what you might want to do, so that you have support from professionals who know what they're doing. Once we've picked the farms that we're going to work with, we are going to have a consultant design the sites for you so that you are following those best technologies, so that you have, we don't expect you to know everything about composting, right? But obviously you're going to have input on what that site looks like, what technology you're going to use. This program also has funding for site improvements and equipment. So this could be like a concrete pad, this could be a compost turner, a skid steer, whatever equipment it is that you need for composting on your site. We have set aside $1 million for this program. I also expect that we will be able to leverage those funds and apply for grant funds and maybe even make that a bigger pot of money. We have support for you. So there is some regulations. There's sometimes local regulations, county level, state level regulations around composting. And this isn't a program where we are just expecting you to put together a grant proposal and we give you the money and you go and run. We are here to support through those regulations and trying to figure them out alongside you. I mean, the state regulations we have a good handle on, but there may be other steps that we need to take. So we're here to help um, hold your hand basically through that process and help make that process as painless as possible. And then training. So we want everyone operating these sites to be a certified compost operator. There's lots of different training options. So this program will help fund that as well. So there's two types of partnerships that we're envisioning. One could be that it's the composting is part of your farm operations. So if you are interested in operating the compost site or having your staff operate the compost site, that is, and you're going to use that finished compost, and we're just doing everything we've talked about so far. You're getting the operator training, we're building the infrastructure, designing the site, and then you're operating that piece of your farm now. But we also think there might be some farms who don't necessarily want to get into compost operations, but would be willing to have compost on site. And so we're also opening up to if you wanted to just open up some of your farm for leasing, that we would lease that land and then we would bring in a certified compost operator and operate that site independent of you. So I'm going to hand it over to James, and he's going to talk a little bit about some of the composting that on farms that he has worked with.
Okay. See the coloring changed a little bit, so I apologize for that. So hi folks, I am James McSweeney. I am a composting consultant and educator. With my consulting company is called Compost Technical Services, and my school is the 131 School of Composting, which is an online school. But I also certainly do a lot of in-person trainings, mainly throughout the Northeast. Next slide, please. And so I'm probably best known for my book, Community Scale Composting Systems, which is really focused on food scrap composting. That's where most of my work has been. I sort of got into composting right around the early push. I wouldn't say the earliest push, but sort of the 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 wider push, I would say, into food scrap composting. And most of my work has been on farms at lots of scales, lots of different materials, mostly in Vermont, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, New York, and more recently, Michigan. I'm based outside of Boston. And yeah, my goal today was just to show some examples of some on-farm systems at different scales. I'm going to sort of walk you through starting at some of the smallest scale on-farm systems up to much larger scale systems. And then, yeah, I'm going to be available to answer your questions as best I can. I'm still getting oriented, I would say, to this region. But composting in every region is a little different and nuanced, obviously. So there'll be some continued orientation and learning on my part as well. This is a small farm called the Georgia Street Community Collective in Detroit, Michigan. That's Mark Covington on the tractor there. He composts food scraps from a local university. and it's sort of a one-to-one relationship between the farm and the food scrap generator. He's been composting in bins and is recently upgrading to aerated bins on the farm. They handle about a quarter of a ton per week of food scraps there. So 500-ish pounds up to. Um, it's it's a it's Why does he do it? As I don't think he doesn't get paid to take the food, but he's growing food for the community essentially. So in the next slide, you can see it's a resilient community resiliency hub. They set up neighborhood kitchens, or they have like not whole kitchens there, but refrigerators where sort of meals get delivered, and it's an area that's really food insecure. And so this is about sort of providing food, fresh food in a food desert, as well as a lot of other resources in this community. So this is an example of he's been, I think I would call it officially composting for about 5 years and really successfully, and learned how to do this at a really small scale, well, without issues. Next slide, please. These are just a couple of smaller drum composting systems, in vessel systems that are relatively low cost. I just threw them in here because I'm starting to work with the one on the right, the Actium batch, which can hold about a cubic yard of material at a time. They're around $10,000. There really hasn't been a system at this scale. For most of my career. And so I'm excited. I'm going to be getting to work with a farm in New York, in Binghamton, New York, who's buying four of these. But it's well tested. These have been used for chicken mortalities mainly in Canada. And there's a system on the left there that's a new system. It's about half the size. I won't spend any more time talking about these systems, but just to give a sense of sort of that there are other options at smaller scales. Next slide, please. This is another nifty system that's just using culverts, 3 and 4 foot culverts that are turned with a hand auger. You can actually create a lot of capacity pretty inexpensively with these types of systems. This Compost for Good in New York is a small nonprofit that has been kind of experimenting and sharing knowledge around both the drum composters and this type of system, which is like a vertical drum type system. It's essentially an in-vessel, but it's static. It's just very low tech in-vessel system that can be very contained and could work in urban gardens, that sort of thing. So this is, let's see, the one on the right there is at a camp. The one on the left is at a state park in New York. Next slide. This is a site that I designed in White River Junction, Vermont. It's an organic CSA farm. They have several hundred members who pick up weekly. They have greenhouses, so they're providing fresh produce year round. And the members have access to a drop off. So they drop off food scraps when they pick up their CSA. They also have deliveries from a small residential collection program. This is a very rural area, and it's rural relative to your county, let's say. Um, it's a little more, it's relatively populated by Vermont standards. But this system was designed for about 2 tons per week, which is pretty small. The next slide. It's also you can see that they're capturing solar energy, so they doubled it up as a solar farm, and they use all their compost on their farm. So and that's really the goal, was to make an organic a compost that could be used, that meets organic standards and can be used in their greenhouses. On the left there, you can see the tipping area where they receive and mix food scraps. on the right, you can see the bays that are aerated. They use an aerated static pile system. It's all relatively low tech. It's beautiful um, um, post and beam structure. So, the next slide. Um, this next slide is the Vermont Youth Conservation Corps, which is educational. We basically took those designs at Sunrise Farm and um, they built a very similar system at the Vermont Youth Conservation Corps. It has a slightly higher capacity because there's more land. At the Sunrise Farm, essentially all of the composting had to be done within that building for reasons of water and ledge and that sort of thing. But this farm, they could finish compost in windrows out around the farm, so they could move material through here a lot faster and finish it out there. So similar design. They'll be using aerated static pile system as well. Next slide, please. This is hard to see because we got a blue background. This is a this is Ellerslie Stables, which is like a they board horses and do, I think, riding lessons and that sort of thing there. I don't know how many horses they have there, but this was a partnership with the village of Rhinebeck and the stable. The stable, they went through a whole process of having a funded site at the town's DPW and then basically neighbors shutting it down, them not being able to do the site, even though it was the town itself trying to do the site. And so Ellerslie Stables stepped in as a partner, as a project partner, and said, I want this to happen. I've got land. In the center there, you can see there's sort of four bays. That's where he was already stacking his manure and composting it in a not in a super formal way. So they were able to transfer funding from the DPW site to this site, and set up an arrangement by which they invested in infrastructure and in trade for 7 years of no tipping fees, essentially. And so the farm got, I, I don't know the exact square footage, but basically got an aerated static pile systems, a bunch of pavement, a mixing area, electric, water, everything they needed to implement a pretty relatively low cost but robust aerated static pile system. If you go to the next slide. Um, if you go to oh yeah, you can see the ASP system on the right there. There are these ASP systems. ASP systems. For those of you who don't know, they use it forced aeration to create aerobic conditions in the compost. And one of the things that it allows for is a lot less turning. Typically, you don't turn for 2 to 4 weeks, and so that allows putrescible materials like food scraps to fully degrade, and also has uh, much easier to meet regulatory heat treatment standards. So you can meet organic standards much more easily and state regulations. And where once there's electricity, you can do these systems for really inexpensively and do them and it also saves footprint. It's because it's a space efficient and space efficiency and time saver. Um, you can see there on the left, they the village has a drop off, and they basically created a custom roll off container for the town's drop off in the village, and the farm picks it up and delivers it. Um, So it's under an acre. You can see it's starting to get up to a decent, I would call small to medium, schmedium scale, 6 to 8 tons a week. is the capacity. They're building towards that slowly as participation and sort of partnerships with haulers develops. This is a pretty recently. And one thing I'll mention here, just because I know that there are horse stables in the region, he he beds with a bedding called hemp herd, which is the pithy core of hemp, like fiber hemp. And it's a really amazing bedding, and it makes a really, really good compost because it has a lot less carbon. So it composts hotter and faster and holds on to water and makes a really, really rich compost. So he's kind of seen this as a win-win. He's sort of adding value um, to the compost itself by adding food scraps. And they were already composting, they're already managing manure. So while it adds some labor, obviously, that you're now handling food scraps, um, it's sort of become a value added, right? Because now they're creating a more valuable product out of that manure that they were already managing. So I've actually really learned a lot from working with this farm, just in terms of their perspectives and how they're doing things. And the hemp herd is amazing as a feedstock. That the horse bedding is was really nice, and pretty much all horse bedding is, but this stuff breaks down just really into quickly into a very rich end product. Next slide, please. There we go. So this is one of the first farms I ever worked with, in Swanton, Vermont. It's the northwest corner, almost up in Canada. And they are a vegetable operation. They work, that I think mainly like their farm store basically, sells their produce. And we developed this compost facility in probably 2011, I want to say. And I've got a backup. It's about an acre. They have a concrete receiving area. They have this that dock that you can either tip a truck, like a roll-off truck, off of, or if mater or like these bins get dropped out of a box truck that they're swapping out. So they kind of can drive that box back that box truck up. It's hard to say, and roll all the bins out there. And then he has this nifty tipping system. It's basically this fulcrum. Um, and yeah, I think they're pretty much doing it the same way they've done it for the last decade. Um, in the next slide, you can see he just composts with his tractor in windrows. Um, I was up there just a few years ago to check in with him, and he said, that there's a few real benefits to having this operation on his farm. One is that he receives a tipping fee. I don't know what his tipping fee is, but he gets paid by the ton essentially. Um, I would guess at this point it's at least $400 a week. So for a farm that's has a lot of fluctuating income, this is sort of a regular income source. Um, he's also said, just he can see the difference in the crops. Like he sees the difference in the soil. The carrots just like they're better. Like he said just he does sell compost, but he uses a lot of it, and I think that's the main motivating factor for him. Um, Richard Hudak is his name. Next slide. So this is Black Dirt Farm. This is probably the most rural of all the farms I've showed you so far. Um, but they are also haulers, and that's probably their main revenue source, but they have a really diversified revenue stream. So they go out, they collect food scraps throughout the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont, and that's their trailer on their left with the tipping system, and then they tip that trailer into a receiving area, blend it up. I think currently there are not chickens in the receiving area. They've ended up segregating the chickens from the receiving area. But they blend material up, kind of get it active, and then in the next slide, I think you can see what happens. You do the next slide. They bring essentially um, loaderfuls of feed out in the chickens forage. And that's sort of eggs are their other or one of their other income sources. It's a very diversified farm. Um, it's a little bit larger scale. It's sort of climbing up. I don't know exactly where they're at right now, but they've sort of fluctuated in the 10 to 15 ton per range, and they also tip at other sites. So their hauling is maybe a little bit bigger than their composting operation, which is nice. This is where they finish the material out in windrows, and that it does also get aerated. Next slide, please. I'll try to wrap up here. Um, Obviously, there's a lot more I could say about each of these operations, but just to kind of give everyone a picture. Next slide. This is a farm in Western Massachusetts, Martin's Farm. Um, Much larger in scale, has been around for probably at least 20 years. Um, They have historically did use a windrow turner, a tractor pulled windrow turner, although they recently switched to just larger loader turned windrows. They have a big receiving area. Um, I don't know much else of what to say about that one, other than that it is relatively close to neighbors. And so odor control is a big piece of what they've had to learn to do there. It's a big piece of property, but there are neighbors relatively nearby. Um, so they're sort of semi-urban, I would say. Next slide. And they're the largest of the farms that I've shown. Um, I threw this in just as sort of an example of how farms often it can work really well for farms to work with a single generator of a large scale sort of a food manufacturing end product. Cranberries is a big one in southeastern Massachusetts, but there are a lot of materials like this, and it can be a really nice setup to have sort of one material coming in versus um, a lot of different materials and mixed. And that may or may not be possible. But where it is, it's certainly worth investigating. And that can be a good way to get an operation started too, is work with sort of find one large generator, and then you can add materials at smaller scales. Next slide. In this last operation is not actually a farm. This is a solid waste district. But the Green Mountain Compost in Williston, um, they're the largest food scrap composting operation in Vermont. They have this large structure where materials are tipped. I believe they have 8 bays in this structure. Um, the first 2 bays are sort of receiving and blending and feedstock storage. And then they have six 300 cubic yard ASP bays. And those bays are where the first 3 to 4 weeks of composting happens. It then gets moved out onto that pad out in front, re-moisturized, reblended, and then put into a secondary aerated static pile system that's not undercover. Next slide. They, I teach at this site. You can see my students there on the right. Next slide, please, Michelle. Let's see. So I've gotten to see how they've developed over the years. They've added this, oops, maybe back up.
That was your last slide.
Oh, was that the last? This was my, wait, will you go back? Oh, here. Oh, yeah, there was, okay, there, I think there was one more slide, but I was just showing that they've added this windrow turner. They do finish their compost out on a different pad with this windrow turner. I think there was a picture of that, but it seems to have disappeared. So,
Sorry.
uh, no, that's all right. That's all right. Yeah, so I mean, happy to answer any questions whenever, yeah, whenever the time comes about these operations or your own operations.
Thanks, James.
Yeah.
The last thing that I wanted to throw in there, because we did get the question, was how will food scraps be delivered to my farm? And that's something that we are working on. This is a picture of Queen City Commons, which is one of the local compost haulers, and their truck. So you can see the cart tipper on the side, kind of similar to some of the technology James was showing. And they are delivering, I think this is at Bar Farm that they were delivering food scraps to.
It is.
So you can just kind of get the scale of what is happening locally. Certainly, we are working on increasing food scrap collection. So we've got other programs to help restaurants and businesses, start capturing their compost. We've got some programs on for food rescue organizations to help them rescue or compost the food that is not of quality to feed people. So we are working on that, and the contamination education is a big part of what we're working on to try to make it so the material that the farms would be receiving is really high quality, very low contamination food scraps. So the one last thing that I wanted to mention before we open it up for questions is the form. So this is what the form looks like on our website. If you go to hamiltoncountyresource.org, if you go under the community section, you'll see the Hamilton County Partnership for On-Farm Composting there. We've got a whole web page with information, and then you can enter this form. And really, we're just looking for basic information at this time. We're not expecting you to know exactly what kind of composting you're wanting to do. We're kind of working on this together. So you would just fill this out and as to what you are, what you're thinking about, if you've got some ideas. And then after April 10th, we're going to start evaluating the responses that we get and interviewing people and talking more and seeing what are the best prospects that we have out there. So I'm going to open it up to questions now, and I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen so everybody can see each other, and I can pull it back up if need be. So, do we have any questions so far in the chat, or if people want to raise their hands or just start calling out? It looks like Stephen, you have a question?
Yeah, hi. So on your web page, you talked about having $200,000 for four uh, facilities that were spread over the county, and then you'd have a couple $100,000 left over for smaller projects. So is that still the plan?
Yeah, that's what we have budgeted is $1 million. So we were, expecting to break that up amongst 4 or 5 farms. And we've gotten a lot of interest from smaller farms. So we may end up just doing, 4 larger sites and then breaking up. There might be farms that need much less than that to get where they're wanting to be. We also have a separate grant that is our innovation grant that is up to 15,000. So there may be some projects that come out of this that we push towards that direction rather than the on-farm composting.
Okay, so but if you're looking at 4 to 5 sites, and your goal is 2,500 tons, you're looking at 400 to 500 tons a year to be able to handle. And the money is for the setup, or is it to pay? Because some of these, I mean, James mentioned that they're getting $40 a ton tipping fees for some of these places. So are you going to be paying for operating costs, or are you expecting you're just going to get us the stuff and then we pay for your operating costs on our own?
Right. So we are using this more as seed money to get the operation together and not be the ones who are paying for the operating. Where the tipping fees or the sale of the compost or the value of the compost for the farm would be the operating expense. Um, we in the instance where a farm wants to lease the land and not operate, then we can talk about, the county paying for the lease of that, but we've not figured operating costs into that budget.
And you're still working out the delivery, so you don't have any. It's chicken and egg, obviously. You got to have a collection system, which is more expensive than the composting system, and then if you collect the stuff, you got to have a place to take it. So you're just going to kind of wing.
Yeah.
You don't have any large. You don't have any large sources already identified that
We
you.
actually do. We have some potential large sources. You're right. It's a chicken and egg and it's a slowly growing. We're just gonna have to both sides getting bigger and bigger. We can't we have invested. We provided Queen City Commons the grant to get that truck that we showed. So we have been investing in infrastructure. There are haulers out there, outside of Queen City Commons as well. We our work very closely with. We had a food manufacturing cohort. So food manufacturers are a great source of really clean food scraps. So we've already made those connections. So we have good leads, and we're working on that part in tandem to working on the infrastructure for processing it.
Michelle, we did get a question in the chat from Diane, who asked, how do you determine the space needed? They have a stable that has 30 to 32 horses, so they were trying to get an idea of the footprint. And then she has a second question about what the distance from the road/property line is required in Hamilton County. I'm assuming from around like how far the compost site has to be from the property line.
So for the first question, that's why we hired a consultant, even for this short-term launch, but then also plan on having consultant help just to figure out what is needed for that. So I don't have those figures off the top of my head. James, I don't expect you to have that calculation, but if you do, let me know. But that's why we've hired a consultant to help figure out those things. So while we might not be able to provide you it right now, we could figure it out of how much space you would need. And it would really depend on the technology too, right? Windrows need a lot more space than the aerated static pile systems. And when you're adding horse manure in there, that's a high volume material. It's going to process faster when you're adding food scraps, right? And adding in that higher nitrogen. So it'll vary. So I don't have an exact question for that. And I would have to look up, there are specific setbacks from roads. I don't know those off the top of my head. But we can look into that and let you know exactly how many feet they have to be from a road. I don't know if anybody else on the resource teams has that at the tip of their fingers, but I don't know that off the top of my head.
I would just say what's important to note there is that it can vary by jurisdiction. And so it's not, Diane specifically asked about Hamilton County. It's not a county decision. It has to do with your municipality or your political jurisdiction. If you're in a city, a village, a township. So that's something where we'll have to dig in a little deeper for each specific site. And then I don't know if Nicole has any other guidance or recommendations there.
Yeah, I think the further we go down this path, the more clarity we're really going to be demanding or requiring from regulators. And at this point, it appears that it's 100 feet. But then to Tony and Michelle's point, it also, there could be, once we go down the path and actually start talking with the folks in charge in specific townships or municipalities, there could be something that we're not aware of from an Ohio level that is unique to that township, et cetera. So we'll make sure to, dot those I's and cross those T's before getting too far down the line. But from an Ohio standpoint, it looks like 100 feet from a roadway is what for manure composting. Very hard to figure out, but that's what the Tony at the Ohio EPA says. Not the same Tony that's on this call.
What other questions do you have?
For sites that we're planning on keeping all the compost, if you overproduce compost, is there any resources for how to sell it if you want to do that?
Nick, you were kind of going in and out. So you said that if you produce more compost than you have, can you sell it? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, kind of. Are there resources to help the organization or the farm sell compost if they overproduce?
Yeah, and that's something that we've been talking about in our community composters group um, there's a possibility that we could, the composters could all get together and kind of have one brand and sell the compost under, one name. It's easier to market that, all together. We've seen that in other areas of the country. So yes, I could see resources happening that they don't currently exist, but I think that's something that we could develop. Stephen, I think you had another question.
Yeah. So is the source of the funding coming from the Hamilton County tipping fees from Rumpke's landfill?
Yes, it is.
So that could be an ongoing source of revenue, or is it
Right now it's just
shot?
Right now it is not. Right now it is funds that we're pulling from our carryover balance that's not in our regular budget. It could, if it's something that this turns into a program that we do develop a really good amount of food scrap processing capacity, then it is something that our policy committee could, decide is something we want to move forward with. But right now it is just a kind of one and done pocket of money.
Okay. And so I'm more concerned about the collection end because that's more expensive. And then you got the contamination issue.
Mm-hmm.
And so are you thinking you're going to have private people like Queen City Commons do it with grants, or how's that going to work?
Yeah, so that is something that we are expecting the private sector, already existing haulers or maybe some new businesses come in. And we're just using Queen City Commons as an example. They have a business, they're charging, just like Rumpke charges to take away garbage, they're charging that business to take away their food scraps. So they are self-sufficient in that standpoint. And they are doing a lot of the education and are collecting really clean material. And so we would be partnering with those organizations who are already doing the collection to get more food scraps. And we are working closely with those organizations to continue to expand the routes. We just have to be careful we don't expand that too quickly before, there's enough places to bring the material. So like you said, it is a chicken and egg situation.
How many collection agencies are you working with now?
Right now, there's two solid ones that are working. There's the Queen City Commons, and then there's one called Go Zero that works in more areas than just locally.
And Rumpke's they're not into it, right?
Rumpke has not been collecting food scraps only for compost right now. They could possibly in the future. They've done that in the past, but right now they are not.
But in terms of commercial sources of not just individual homes with food scraps, but places to process, they're not. That's the easy pickings to kind of get the large sources. But you don't have any of those in mind, really?
We do. So from our food manufacturing cohort, we've identified some larger sources of food scraps. And then we've been partnering with food rescue organizations like the Free Store Food Bank and other that receive a lot of food that they get dumped on, quite frankly, a lot. They get a lot of bananas that aren't edible that they need to get rid of. And so right now, all those places, not all of them, but many of them are landfilling that material. So we're working closely with them to be able to divert that to composting.
I'll just chime in for a second. You're very right, Stephen, that that you have this chicken and egg situation. and with, it's hard to develop food scrap diversion and collection programs without infrastructure, and vice versa. But the timeline for developing this type of infrastructure, um, and scaling it up actually seems, in my experience, seems to pair pretty well with the timeline for a collection sort of developing. And particularly if you have large generators who can get on board, it can happen relatively quickly, but it's like sort of like a faucet. Like you don't want to turn it up too fast, but you want to be prepared to have the faucet in place to kind of open it up a little bit. And to Diane's question, I think I would um, encourage people to just connect and kind of express interest so that we can know what the questions are and drill into those questions of scale and setbacks. Like those are all the key early questions that any operation just has to answer. But it just from my week of being involved in this, I am already seeing how having the solid waste district, having the conservation district, they're already bringing in all these partners to talk about it, and that's how this happens. Like that's just how it happens, is multiple conversations and iterations of the conversation to get to those questions and start to answer those questions. I would also just add that the hauling infrastructure is not necessarily more expensive than the composting infrastructure. And it also is faster to get revenue because you can start charging for collection right off the bat. So it's whereas compost takes, it takes time to develop the infrastructure, it takes time to make compost and then sell. So I think I have a lot of faith because it's a very populated region that collection in some ways will be simpler. But especially because there already are some. Obviously, not that it's not work, it's all quite a bit of work to do all this. But yeah, that tends to be faster in my experience.
And we did do an organics study, and the consultant came up with that we are currently landfilling about 138,000 tons of food scraps a year as a county. So that's all of our businesses and residents and everything. We know that we're never going to capture that full 138,000 tons of food scraps, but we are currently composting just under, I think, 6,000 tons a year that we've had documented. So there is some happening, but we know that there's a lot of room for growth. Well, we have a few more minutes for questions if anybody has any. You have another one, Stephen? Well, no one else has asked, so
I
go
don't want
for
to
it.
monopolize the conversation. So if nobody else does, I'll chime in some comments, but feel free to get somebody else first.
I don't think we have anyone else, so go ahead.
Well, we composted with Pipkin's Market years and years and years, and that was a source, a small quantity, but it's cheaper than trying to go household to household or having a community drop off at a park or something and picking up little bins. I mean, and then if you look at the wholesalers who have produce waste from stuff they don't sell, I mean, of course it's in boxes and you got issues there like Crossets and Freezes and those folks. So I mean, it seems to me if you're trying to get the easiest stuff, you want to go to places like that, or even Kroger's or someplace that Walmart that throws away lots and lots of produce, and just to keep the cost of collection down. And then of course I'm associated with Gorman Farm, and we just compost leaves that come. We got a huge compost of leaves, and it decomposes really slowly because it's basically all carbon and there's no nitrogen source. So, I mean, if you want to do something fast and cheap, you just dump a bunch of produce waste in there, and as long as you turned it, it wouldn't cost that much to get started. Now you could get overwhelmed because that stuff's wet. I mean, it's nastier than manure. A lot of produce waste is, it's a higher nitrogen content, but it's really, really wet.
Mhm.
mean, and that's, you got to get some kind of bulking agent to deal with that, the liquid, and don't not have runoff. And but I mean, in terms of systems, you could throw that thing together really fast until you got more stuff coming in than you could handle adequately, and then you start making a mess. But on the other hand, if you want to put in a huge system with your blowers and concrete pads and stuff, you're looking at a huge investment up front, but then you better have the material to run through it. So I'm not quite sure how you're going to line up your collections and your operations, unless you just want to put in a bunch of little bins and, do, a quarter ton a week. But anyway, we'll fill out the forms and see. But yeah, your collection is going to be the key, and getting it when it's not full of junk.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Trying to make sure that the contamination is very limited is important. Any other questions?
Michelle, I will just jump in here and
Sure.
just there is a huge appetite in the commercial and industrial sector for capacity. And as Michelle's alluded to, like that's what we're working on, is building up the capacity. There is more than enough appetite. And we've been lucky enough to be in positions where we can bring some of these local haulers to these agencies and have the conversations. And this is necessary to scale up to make those opportunities a reality. We need to scale up, and that's where we are. So there is a huge hunger for more places to compost, and the infrastructure that is being built is a professional hauling infrastructure. It's small, it's local, but it is much more sufficient than just a person in a pickup truck delivering materials. And so I just want to share that there's a big hunger. The hauling infrastructure has the capacity to scale up and grow. But we do need more sites to compost this material, to make some of these visions, goals, dreams for some of these manufacturers and processors, to make those a reality.
All right. Any other questions? Yeah, Amanda.
Songs here
I
also.
have to. Hamilton County the district be providing resources about things like, to help us understand, for us who don't work in waste collection and all that, what the incentives are for food producers to what are their incentives to give, like, for us to collect food scrap, for them to do it through Queen City Commons or somebody, rather than going through Rumpke to pick it up, and other resources like that, just to help us understand, like, who's interested, why they're interested, so that we can navigate that. Or does the district have resources? Will they be able to point us to resources for that?
So are you talking from a generator standpoint, like why resources for, say, a food manufacturer who has food scraps, why they would, or why a farm would accept it?
Why they would? What I kind of understand the whole cycle, but I work on the farm here, so I understand why we want it and we would do it. I don't understand necessarily what the incentive is for the food manufacturer.
Absolutely. Mary, would you want to answer that question? Because I know you've worked more closely with food manufacturers and other commercial organizations.
Sure. There are a few different reasons. So it kind of depends location-wise to some degree. So there's lots of coastal states where it's more expensive for them to landfill than it is for them to compost. The other reasons are going to be more around their sustainability targets and whether they need to be reporting their carbon. A lot of them have greenhouse gas emissions, reporting that they're either required to do by the EU, or California is requiring that somewhat now. So reducing food waste is one of the best things that they can do for their scope 3 emissions. So a lot of them are doing it for that reason. But a lot of it is just for their sustainability programs. Also kind of the story that they can say around no one wants to be wasting food. So those are the majority of the reasons that a lot of them are looking to kind of divert that waste.
And Mary, I'm going to jump in after that. We had this conversation the other day. These are food manufacturers, food processors. They know where their material is coming from. They understand the value of farms. And in every conversation I've had, it comes up. They're like, oh, well, this is stupid that like we've got all of this material that came from a farm that we're going to dump in a landfill. They know the absurdity of that. They're aware. They're looking for an affordable solution to that, but they are hyper aware of the reality that we need to figure out a solution domestically to create soil amendments, that people are hyper concerned about fertilizer application, and that these manufacturers are aware of all of those things. They are aware of the geopolitical issues and aware of the challenges around importing nitrogen from, other countries. This comes up in the kind of conversation. They're aware of the value that these materials have. So they know it's a waste product. They know that they're going to have to pay to get rid of it. And so they know that if they send it somewhere where it can be turned into a soil amendment, they're building toward an infrastructure where this someday can supplement the need for imported fertilizers. They're aware of these issues. And so they're interested in finding a
They
solution.
understand and care about sustainability.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And one other thing I would add is that for anyone in the city of Cincinnati, we have a waste franchise program, and for all waste that goes to landfill, there's a 20% fee added on. And so if they divert to recycling or composting instead, they'll immediately save that 20%, 20 to 25%.
Thanks. Well, we are out of time, so we're gonna wrap up. I do want to thank everybody for hopping on and listening. If you have any other questions, reach out to anyone, reach out to Nicole or myself, and we will try to answer your questions. We will have for this until the end of April, we've got James on board. So if you are thinking about it and you'd like to talk to James about maybe some ideas before you fully commit and fill out the form, feel free. But we will certainly be in touch if you fill out the form. And we are really excited about this opportunity and excited about the interest we've received in it so far. So thank you all so much and have a good rest of your Monday.